all share this one round planet, and what happens in one place eventually has an impact on the whole world. When natural resources are polluted, it eventually becomes everyone's problem. That's why this issue of the environment is deeply relevant to you and everyone you know. One of the most famously polluted rivers in US history was the Cuyahoga. It meanders through northeastern Ohio and empties into Lake Erie when it reaches Cleveland. Decades of industrial waste from oil refineries, chemical plants, and steel foundries turned the water into a cesspool. In 1969, a spark from a passing train ignited debris that was floating on the water. The surface of the river burst into flame. Billowing black clouds shot up more than 5 stories high, and the fire burned for half an hour. You'd think this would have been front-page news, but actually it wasn't the first or even the 10th time the Cuyahoga River had caught on fire. It was the 13th. Radicals, liberals, and conservatives absolutely agree that polluted air, water, and land can be dangerous, and they share the same goal of having breathable air, drinkable water, and habitable land. But they strongly disagree on how to achieve that end. That's what all the fights are about when it comes to the environment. It's time to hear the voices.
So, about the Cuyahoga River. It became a cesspool because of private ownership and the drive for profit. So, the culprit in this story is capitalism. To be competitive, firms were forced to choose short-term gains over long-term sustainability. They ended up turning the river into a fire hazard. The opposite happens when worker owners live in the communities where they produce. The environment is cherished and protected. In democratic socialism, natural resources are owned by the whole community, so everyone has a personal stake in keeping them viable and thriving. When you go to the store, you can trust that all the products on the shelves were made with careful attention to reducing the human footprint. The drive for well-being pressures worker-owned firms to innovate and adopt best practices like using minimal packaging and the cleanest technologies. A commitment to sustainable development means we never have a tragedy of the commons in the first place. Using wise investment and planning, we preserve and replenish our natural resources so we can meet our present-day material needs. And we can make sure that those who follow us in years to come will also have what they need to flourish. Liberals, your command and control regulations don't work because firms in capitalism are forced to do whatever is necessary to generate more profit. They cheat, cut corners, and trash our natural resources to boost their bottom lines. When your new regulation requires them to put filters on smokestacks, massive campaign contributions go into politicians' pockets. Suddenly, the pollution standards are rewritten and the firm gets an exemption and doesn't have to comply. In the meantime, workers and their families are exposed to the toxic fumes that poison the air. They get sick and die from cancer and heart disease. Liberals supplement their big idea of command and control with carbon pricing, but it's nothing more than a program to let firms pay more to pollute more. It's not a real solution. It barely reduces carbon emissions. In every way, fair market policies fail us, and they fail the earth. And conservatives, your plan to expand privatization of our country's natural resources trades society's well-being for a few more dollars in a private owner's pocket. Profit-hungry firms mine ore and leave behind toxic waste that lasts for generations. They decimate our old-growth forests and pollute our groundwater through fracking and drilling. Communities pay the price, public health crises, and higher taxes to clean up the mess left behind. In the meantime, those firms move on and set up shop in the next town. Meanwhile, conservatives congratulate themselves on finding a new way to make a buck with their free market pollution permits and revenue-neutral carbon taxes. But these aren't solutions. They give firms a profit motive, but without any consequences if they don't participate. The fossil fuel industries continue to thrive. Carbon emissions stay dangerously high, and global climate change continues to threaten all life on Earth. Here's what we should do to ensure that we have breathable air, drinkable water, and habitable land. Use the Green New Deal. It establishes realistic and attainable goals for net zero greenhouse gas emissions. It makes long-term investments in clean energy and infrastructure. And it supports sustainable farming and manufacturing. At the same time, stewardship councils use rigorous, data-driven analyses to determine the optimal levels of pollution abatement. This guarantees ecological resilience. In democratic socialism, we have a social commitment to tread as lightly as possible on the earth. Every decision is made with an awareness that past generations left us with a clean environment, and that allows us to thrive today. Likewise, we are responsible for paying it forward and leaving those who come after us a healthy, thriving planet. So, about the Cuyahoga River. The government didn't set limits on how the river was used, so generations of individuals and businesses lost the chance to use it for their livelihoods and recreation. We could have protected this vital artery of our nation with the helping hand of government. When we have a strong public-private partnership, everyone does their fair share to protect the commons for all. We all share this one planet, and we need to consider the consequences of our actions on others. Pollution and climate change threaten our way of life. No individual or firm can change this perilous situation, but government is the impartial player that makes sure everyone participates equitably to keep natural resources resilient. Our tax dollars support vital environmental agencies composed of experts, scientists, and policymakers. They work for us by establishing and enforcing the standards that guide firms to protect the environment. Fair market capitalism gives firms the right incentives to pollute less and clean up more. And because all firms have to comply, no individual company or industry bears an unreasonable burden. They can all stay competitive. Conservatives, you are total hypocrites. You trash talk environmental regulations and dismiss the downstream effects of pollution while you breathe the clean air and drink the clean water brought to us by the EPA. Now you want to extend private property rights by selling off our natural resources to the highest bidders. You let them drill for oil, frack for natural gas, and mine for coal, and we have more polluted air, water, and land from all that extraction. We also have more greenhouse gas emissions from burning those fossil fuels. Your carbon pricing is another fail. It only works as a supplement to strong environmental regulations, not as the only fix. All your free market ideas amount to letting firms pay to pollute, whether it's paying a private owner, paying a revenue-neutral carbon tax, or paying for pollution permits on the open market. Conservative policies endanger the planet. And radicals, when your society descends into poverty because there's no motivation for anyone to produce anything in democratic socialism, people get desperate and end up decimating our natural resources to survive. We all want to live in a country that has fresh air, pure water, and fertile land, but we heal the planet with the scalpel of green capitalism, not the sledgehammer of your Green New Deal. Under the radical plan, there's no dispassionate cost-benefit analyses. Decisions are made by committees of stakeholders. No one makes objective decisions about the environment. Stewardship councils spend years trying to assess every possible impact of the downstream of the downstream of the downstream effects of pollution. Decisions get held up in committee, and even firms that are willing to produce never get a green light to move forward with production. We don't get the goods and services we need, including the essential service of pollution abatement. Here's what we should do to ensure that we have breathable air, drinkable water, and habitable land. Strengthen, command, and control regulations. We know it's in our best interest to have a clean environment, and we know that firms need an incentive to make it a priority. That's where the government comes in. In fair market capitalism, it sets standards, makes sure all firms comply, and it imposes sanctions on violators. It also invests in new technologies that lower the cost of pollution abatement. So we end up with an even cleaner environment. Then we use the supplemental policy of carbon pricing to motivate firms to cut emissions even more. The helpful hand of government, coupled with the power of the profit motive, saves our planet. So, about the Cuyahoga River. This precious resource was like an unloved orphan. No one owned the river, so firms took advantage. They had no incentive to keep it from becoming a cesspool, so they continued to trash it. Natural resources are best protected through private ownership. When there's a private owner, we strike the right balance between producing what society wants and needs and protecting the environment. We can have the clean environment we all want and need because free market price signals give firms the right incentives to innovate and adapt. Every business wants to be profitable. So, all we have to do is make pollution abatement reward the bottom line. Firms don't need to be told what to do. They come up with innovative ways to prevent and clean up pollution because it's in their self-interest. They switch to compostable packaging, they invest in renewable energy, they develop more sophisticated scrubbers and filters. All of this activity is guided by the invisible hand of price signals. We have a clean and healthy planet because of the willing cooperation of the private sector, and we achieve it in the fastest, most efficient, and least expensive way. Radicals. You trash talk capitalism while ignoring the fact that your cell phone, electric car, solar panels, and most importantly, the fresh air you breathe are brought to you by the drive for profit. Before you radically reject capitalism, consider that without it, there's no motivation for anyone to dream, invent, or work hard, and no motivation for anyone to clean up the environment. In democratic socialism, you outlaw private ownership, so everything becomes the commons. Tragedy is inevitable, because when no one owns it, no one takes care of it. Your big idea is the Green New Deal. Okay, maybe it will achieve net zero carbon emissions, but that's only because no factories will operate when ownership is required to be cooperative. With radical policies, we'll all be poor together, and we won't be in any position to clean up the environment or respond to the threat of global climate change. And liberals. We can blame your command and control regulations for the sad state of our environment today. Businesses have no buy-in, so they cut corners and cheat instead of cleaning up pollution. You handcuff them to doing things your way, which stifles their ability to innovate. You love to go on about the so-called public-private partnership as if it's a consensual relationship, but it's not. An equal partnership wouldn't include the threat of fines and shutdowns to force compliance. Carbon pricing might be a sensible market-based solution, except the liberal version turns it into a cash cow to fund more big government. We won't see any progress on pollution abatement or movement on the next generation clean technologies when fair market capitalism plops a mountain of regulations in our path. It leads us to the brink of an environmental collapse and keeps us drowning in pollution, while we watch the world's thermometer relentlessly rise. Here's what we should do to ensure that we have breathable air, drinkable water, and habitable land. Expand private property rights to address local pollution. When natural resources are privately owned, owners have every motivation to make sure firms that use the resources won't overpollute. And those firms have every motivation not to get sued, so they comply. If businesses are willing to pay more to use a resource that's even cleaner, owners will increase pollution abatement. To address global pollution, we use a revenue-neutral carbon tax and free market cap and trade. Firms don't want to pay a tax or spend money on a pollution permit, so they will find cost-effective ways to cut emissions. With these sensible and responsible policies, we inspire human ingenuity and save the Earth.
You've just heard the arguments about the environment from 3 perspectives. They all want breathable air, drinkable water, and habitable land, but they have very different ways of achieving that goal. Now, it's time for you to be part of the conversation.